My name is Connor Fletcher. I'm 71 years old. I spent 35 years as a fire captain, running into buildings while everybody else ran out. My daughter's husband got a big promotion at his firm, and he threw a party at their house to celebrate it. I showed up in my good jacket. He met me at the door and told me the guest list was client-facing only. I built the deck on that house myself, with my own hands, on a weekend, for free. He forgot that fast. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to understand that before we go any further. I didn't crash that party. I did something worse. 3 weeks later, I walked back into that same house, into a room his entire career depended on, and I didn't have to say a single word. The most important man in that room said it all for me. Welcome back to the channel, where the quiet ones usually earn the right to be the loudest. Stick around to the end of this one. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Here's what 35 years in a fire company does to a man. It doesn't make you hard, it makes you steady. When a floor is about to go and a man is screaming behind a door, you don't get to panic. You get to be the only calm thing left in the building. I pulled people out of places that should have killed them. I lost 2 men on my crew over the years, good men, and I carried that weight home every time and put it down quiet, so my family never had to touch it. My wife Louise used to leave the porch light on for me on bad nights. She passed 6 years ago. She was the only one who understood the job wasn't a job. It was something you did because somebody had to. My daughter's name is Harley. She's 34, smart, driven, married a man named Gabriel Barnes 4 years back. Gabriel works in commercial real estate finance, and he's good at it, I'll give him that. He learned the suits, the watch, the handshake that makes rich men trust him. Somewhere along the way, he decided the people worth knowing wear a certain kind of shoe, and the people who don't are the help. 3 years ago, Harley and Gabriel bought a house here in Nashville, out past Belle Meade. Big lot, glass and stone, the kind of place that photographs well. They were short on the down payment. Harley asked me. I had it. 35 years of overtime pay and a paid-off house leaves a man with more than people assume. I gave them $52,000. I had a lawyer draw up a simple note, low interest, a real signature, a real date. I filed it in a drawer and never expected to need it. Gabriel forgot about that money faster than I thought a grown man could forget anything. By the time the house was finished and photographed and posted online, the story had changed. He built this himself, self-made, and I was the guy who showed up on weekends with a truck full of lumber, useful right up until the cameras came out. The night of his promotion party, he stood in that same doorway I'd framed the porch light for and told me I wasn't on the list. I said okay. I drove home. I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table a long time, and that's when I remembered something Gabriel had let slip on the phone a few weeks earlier. The name of the one client who could make his whole career. A name I recognized. A name that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with a fire a long time ago in this same city. My own daughter stood in my kitchen and asked me to sign my life away, and she did it smiling. That's Harley, 30 years old, black blazer, a folder tucked under her arm like she was closing a deal. Behind her stood her husband, Logan Baker, not saying a word, just watching the room like he was pricing the furniture. I'm Connor Fletcher, 58. I run forklifts at a warehouse off Sprague Avenue. Raised 2 daughters on my own. Harley from my first marriage, and Louise, 8 years old from a relationship that came later in life and didn't last. I've never had real money, not once in 58 years. Then my brother Dale died out in Butte, Montana, and left me 60 acres of land nobody ever wanted, except a mining company had already been circling that county for 2 years. Rare earth minerals. The number came back at $6 million. I made the mistake of telling Harley first. Within days, she was calling nonstop. You need a trust, Dad. You need protection. What happens to Louise if something happens to you? She had every answer ready before I could ask a single question. I signed something. 3 pages. She told me it was routine. Less than 2 weeks later, a county clerk called my son Ashton. Somebody had filed papers questioning whether I was fit to manage an estate. Grief, instability, concern for a minor in the home. The name on that filing was Harley Fletcher Baker. I sat with that letter a long time. My hands were steady. That's what scared me, how steady they were. 2 days after that, Harley called again, gentle this time. "Come to the lake, Dad. Logan and I found a cabin. Bring Louise. Let's fix this like a family." My son said one sentence to me before I left. "Don't go, Dad." I heard him. I went anyway, because Louise heard the word lake and looked at me the way an 8-year-old looks at you when she wants something and has no idea what she's really asking for. We drove out to Flathead Lake that Saturday. Louise was asleep against my arm before we even hit the Montana line. Harley drove. Logan sat up front, quiet, checking the mirrors more than the road ahead. I should have clocked that. I didn't. The cabin sat right on the water, and the lake itself looked too calm to be dangerous. That was the whole trick of it. If you're still here, drop a 1 in the comments, because in 20 seconds, I'm going to wake up on a boat with my daughter's note in my pocket and my little girl not opening her eyes. Heat is what pulled me out of it. Not a bed under me. Metal. Sun pressing straight down on my face. I opened my eyes to nothing but water and sky in every direction, and Louise was lying beside me in a life jacket, lips gone pale, and she wasn't waking up.
I said her name twice before her eyes cracked open. "Louise." Nothing. "Louise, look at me." Her lids fluttered, and for a second that was the only thing holding the whole world together. One small movement, one sign that she was still in there. I sat up slow because the boat rocked with every shift of my weight, and I looked around at nothing. No shoreline close enough to matter, no other boats, just flat water stretching out in every direction, indifferent, like it didn't know or care what had been done to us on top of it. The engine housing was empty, no key. I checked the side compartment. The oars were gone. The flare box hung open, stripped clean. Somebody had gone through this boat piece by piece, methodical, and taken anything that could have gotten us home. Then I saw the bottle. Red sports drink, half empty, rolling near my foot with the motion of the water. Logan had handed it to me himself back at the dock that morning. "Stay hydrated out there, Connor," he'd said, friendly as anything. I remembered drinking most of it on the ride out. I remembered Louise taking a few sips too, because I'd told her to. I picked the bottle up and smelled it. Underneath the cherry flavor, there was something flat and chemical that had no business being in a drink you hand an 8-year-old. That's when I found the note. Folded once, tucked under the bowline where it wouldn't blow off. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Harley's. The same careful loops she'd used signing birthday cards since she was in middle school. "Dad, I'm sorry. You didn't give me a choice. By the time anyone finds you, it'll be over. I'll take care of Louise, I promise." I read it 4 times like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense if I just looked at it long enough. My daughter, the one who was supposed to help take care of her little sister, had put an 8-year-old on a stripped boat in the middle of a lake and driven off. For land. For a number on a piece of paper that some appraiser wrote down in an office somewhere. I folded the note and put it in my shirt pocket. Evidence. Not proof yet, just paper. But it was paper that could put her in a cell. And some part of me, some cold, quiet part I didn't like meeting, was already glad I had it. Then I made myself think instead of feel, because feeling wasn't going to get us off that water. I took inventory like my life depended on it, because it did. 2 sealed water bottles in the storage bin, 1 granola bar, a small first aid kit that wasn't going to do much of anything out here. No shade except our own bodies, and Montana's sun in July doesn't care that you didn't ask to be out on it. I did the math in my head without wanting to. 10 hours before it got serious, less for Louise. I checked under every panel in that boat, bench seats, the hollow space near the bow where the fiberglass met the hull. That's where my hand hit something hard, wedged in tight. 1 handheld flare, old casing, faded orange, the kind you find in a surplus bin. No idea if it's still fired after sitting God knows how long. 1 shot. That was all we had. Louise was watching me the whole time, quiet in a way that 8-year-olds get when they're scared and trying hard not to show it, because they're watching your face to figure out how scared they're allowed to be. "Dad," she said, voice small, "are we going to be okay?" I put the flare down in my lap and looked her straight in the eye because she needed to see it there, steady. "Yeah," I said, "but you got to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" She nodded, didn't cry. 8 years old, stuck in the middle of a lake because her own sister decided she was worth less than a mining contract, and she didn't cry once. I don't know where kids get that kind of strength. I don't know if I had it in me at that age. I looked out at the water and told myself something plain and hard. Nobody's coming to find us on their own. Nobody knows we're out here except the 2 people who put us here, and they're not calling anybody. We're going to have to make somebody find us. The flare might not work after sitting in that hull who knows how long. I didn't know, but I held it in both hands and looked up at the sky and understood one thing as clear as anything I've ever known in my life. Fire it too soon, and nobody's close enough to see it happen. Fire it too late, and the light's already gone, and so are we. So I waited. I watched the water, every direction, for anything that moved that wasn't a bird or a wave catching the sun wrong. That's when I saw it, a shape out past the point, pale against the dark shoreline, moving slow. A boat, maybe a mile out, maybe more. Hard to tell with the heat bending the air like that. I stood up slow so I wouldn't tip us, flare gripped in both hands, and it hit me plain and simple. I had exactly 1 shot to get this right, and if I got it wrong, my daughter was going to die out here on this water because her own sister decided she was worth less than $6 million and decided it was worth more than both of us put together. I pulled the cap off the flare with my thumb, hands steadier than they had any right to be. Old military-style thing, pull cord ignition, no guarantee left in it after however many years sitting in that hull. I said something to nobody in particular, not really a prayer, just a plea shoved out into the air, and pulled. It fired. Bright orange smoke shot up and hung there, ugly and beautiful at the same time, the only color on that whole lake that didn't belong. I held it high and turned in a slow circle so the smoke spread wide across the water. 30 seconds. 40. The boat out past the point slowed down, then turned. Toward us. I sat back down before my legs gave out on their own. Louise reached over without a word and took my hand, and I held onto it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The man who found us was named Gabriel Barnes, 63, retired game warden, out checking the shallows for something else entirely when he saw the smoke. He had a cooler full of water bottles and a marine radio, and the kind of face that told you right away he'd seen bad situations before and didn't rattle easy. He looked at the 2 of us, sunburned, dehydrated, an 8-year-old in a life jacket 3 sizes too big, and started talking into his radio before he'd even pulled the boat alongside. He gave Louise water first, made her sip it slow instead of gulping it. Then he looked at me over the top of her head. "What happened out here?" I told him. The cabin, the drink Logan handed me at the dock, waking up adrift, the stripped boat, the note in my pocket. His jaw tightened up, but he didn't say much, just picked up the radio again and called it in.
We reached the marina at Polson 40 minutes later. There was already a late county sheriff's deputy standing on the dock, and for one stupid second, I thought he was there for us, for what had been done to us. I was wrong. Somebody had already gotten to him first. Harley and Logan had driven back hours earlier, calm, unhurried, and told the harbor master that Connor Fletcher, their father, had been acting erratic all weekend, that he had a documented depression history, that he'd taken his 8-year-old daughter out on the water alone against everyone's advice, that they'd been worried sick, driving the shoreline for hours looking for him. They'd filed the welfare check themselves. Concerned family. Their names right there on the paperwork. The deputy's first question wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "Mr. Fletcher, are you currently under any kind of mental health treatment?"
I stood there, soaked through, sunburned, my daughter's hands still in mine. And that was the question waiting for me on solid ground. My own daughter hadn't just tried to get rid of me. She'd made sure that if I somehow survived it, nobody standing on that dock would believe a word I said. I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out the note, and handed it to him without saying anything else. Let the paper talk instead of me. He read it. I watched his face change while he did, the tightening around his eyes, the way his mouth flattened out. "Mr. Fletcher," he said, quieter now, "I think we need to get you and your daughter looked at." That's how we ended up at Kalispell Hospital that night, under fluorescent lights that made everything look worse than it already was. Louise sat on a bed in a gown 2 sizes too big, working on a popsicle a nurse had found for her from somewhere. Her shoulders were already blistering red from the sun. I sat in the chair next to her and didn't move. A detective came by around 9 that evening. Luca Howard, mid-40s, short dark hair, carried a notepad like she already had a good guess what was in it and just needed me to say it out loud. She asked her questions in order. The papers I'd signed back in Spokane, the petition, the invitation to the lake, Logan handing me that bottle at the dock, waking up adrift, the note. I told her all of it, start to finish. She wrote every word down without interrupting once. When I finished, she looked up. "Do you still have the note?" I handed it over in the evidence bag Gabriel Barnes had thought to seal it in back on his boat before any of us even reached shore. Detective Howard read it once, set it down flat on the table between us, and looked me steady. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, "that sports drink bottle, do you know where it ended up?" "Still on the boat, if nobody's moved it." She nodded once and picked up her phone. That was the worst part, honestly. Not the lake, not the heat, the waiting that came after. Sitting in a plastic chair under bad lighting, watching my daughter sleep off a sunburn, and not knowing yet whether the truth was going to be enough to matter. 48 hours is a long time to sit in a hospital family room doing nothing but wait. Long enough to replay every phone call Harley ever made me, every birthday card, every time she called me at midnight because something in her life had gone sideways and I picked up anyway. Long enough to ask myself where exactly I lost her, and never land on an answer that made sense. Detective Howard came back on the second evening. She sat down across from me, opened her notepad, and didn't waste any time getting to it. "Lorazepam," she said, "in both streamlines. A benzodiazepine sedative. In a grown man, enough to put you under for 4 to 6 hours. In an 8-year-old girl," she paused there, and I watched her choose her next words carefully. "It was a significant dose, more than significant." I stared at the wall behind her because I couldn't look at her face while she said it. Logan Baker had handed my daughter a drugged drink, watched her take a few sips, and smiled like he was doing us a favor. Detective Howard kept going. The bottle had been recovered off the boat. Logan's prints on the cap, Harley's on the body of the bottle. The dosage wasn't sloppy. It wasn't a mistake. Somebody had looked up exactly how much it would take. Then she told me about the phone records. In the 6 hours after Harley and Logan drove off that lake, Harley made 4 calls, 2 to a family attorney, 1 to a real estate consultant, 1 to a title company back in Butte. Not 1 call to search and rescue, not 1 to the sheriff, not 1 to anybody who might have pulled a father and his 8-year-old daughter out of that water before the heat finished what the drug started. She knew we were still out there. That was the part that didn't sit right in my chest, even days later. Not the note, not the drink, the 4 calls that weren't to us. "There's more," Detective Howard said, and pulled out a printed page. "We got a warrant for Logan Baker's laptop." She read it slow, letting each line land on its own. Sedative dosage by body weight, searched 6 weeks before the trip. Flathead Lake water temperature in July, 5 weeks before. How long heat exposure to cause incapacitation, 5 weeks before. Estate transfer timeline following accidental death, 4 weeks before. Benzodiazepine detection window in a blood test, 3 weeks before. He'd sat at a computer and typed my daughter's survival odds into a search bar like he was planning a fishing trip. I pressed both hands flat against the table to keep them from shaking. "How long?" I said. "How long had they been planning this?" She closed the notepad. "At least 3 months, probably longer." Then she told me what her team had pulled from the financial side. Harley and Logan were $310,000 in debt, 2 failed business ventures, a house in Kalispell, 3 payments from foreclosure. When I inherited Dale's land, they were already drowning in it. $6 million. That's what they decided my life and Louise's both were worth. Mine and Louise's. They looked at us and looked at a number, and the number won. I thought about Harley at 7 years old, asleep in the back seat on long drives, how I used to carry her inside so she wouldn't wake up, how she used to call me at midnight when something in her life fell apart, and I never once let it go to voicemail. You give a kid everything you've got, and then you end up in a hospital family room listening to a detective explain how that same kid calculated the price of your death down to the week. I stood up, wiped my face once, and looked at her. "What do you need from me?" She almost smiled, but it didn't quite make it there. "Everything," she said. "We're going to use all of it." 2 days later, my son Ashton drove up from Spokane. He walked into that room, looked at Louise asleep in the bed with her sunburned shoulders peeking out from under the blanket, looked at me, and didn't say a word for a long moment. Then he held up his phone. There was an email pulled up on the screen, sent from Harley's account to a probate attorney in Missoula, dated the Monday right after the trip. Subject line, confirming next steps re Fletcher estate following incident. She'd written that email before she knew whether we were alive or dead. I read it twice, same as I read the note on the boat, waiting for it to say something different the second time through. It never did. 3 months later, we were standing outside a courthouse in Missoula, and I still hadn't figured out how to feel about any of it. Not the money, not the land, not the daughter sitting on the other side of that building who used to fall asleep in my truck.
The drive down to the courthouse took 3 hours. Louise stayed home with Ashton's wife, Renata. She wasn't ready to sit in a room and look at her sister. I wasn't sure I was either, but I put on the only dark suit I owned, the one I'd worn to Dale's funeral, and walked in anyway. Harley sat at the defense table in a black blazer, hair pulled back, hands folded like she was at a business meeting instead of a trial for trying to kill her own family. Logan sat next to her, jaw set, staring straight ahead like the room wasn't full of people who already knew what he'd done. Their lawyer was polished, expensive, and had the practiced calm of a man paid good money to make the indefensible sound reasonable. Harley looked at me once when I walked in, then she looked away. 4 months since she left me and her 8-year-old sister to die on that lake, and all I got was one look, then nothing. I sat down next to my attorney and stared straight ahead, too. The district attorney's name was Patricia Holt, 50s, no theatrics, just facts laid out one after another like concrete blocks. She walked the jury through Flathead Lake, through the lorazepam in both our bloodstreams, through the note, the stripped engine, the missing oars, the one flare that happened to get left behind and saved our lives by accident. Then she put Logan's search history up on a screen big enough for every juror to read for themselves. Sedative dosage by body weight, how long heat exposure takes to cause incapacitation, estate transfer timeline following accidental death. She read each line slow and let the silence afterward do its own work. A woman on the jury put her hand over her mouth. An older man in the back row shook his head and looked down to the floor. The defense stood up and called it a family miscommunication blown out of proportion, called the search history morbid curiosity, called the note an emotional overreaction to a dispute over land, said I had a documented history of depression and had misread the whole situation. Nobody in that room believed a word of it. You could feel it in the air. It just went flat and stayed there. Patricia Holt called me to the stand. I sat down, looked at the jury instead of my daughter, and told them what it felt like waking up on that boat. The heat first, reaching for Louise before I reached for anything else, counting her breaths until she opened her eyes, finding the note and sitting with it a long time before I let myself understand what it actually meant. She asked me what I felt, reading it. I told her I felt like I was grieving somebody who was still alive, because the daughter who wrote that note wasn't the same person I raised, and I couldn't tell you exactly when the switch happened. I just knew that somewhere between her childhood and whatever she'd become, I'd lost her long before that lake ever came into it. 2 jurors were crying by the time I finished. On cross-examination, the defense came at me hard, asked if my depression, my financial stress, might have affected my perception of what happened that weekend. I looked him dead in the eye and said my daughter Louise was 8 years old, and she had lorazepam in her blood too, and her perception wasn't affected by grief. It was affected by a drug her sister's husband put in her drink on purpose. You can question my state of mind all you want. You can't question a lab report. He sat back down and didn't ask anything else. On redirect, Patricia Holt asked if there was anything I wanted to say. I looked at Harley for the first time since I'd taken the stand, and this time she didn't look away. I told her I used to carry her inside from the truck when she fell asleep on long drives every single time, and she was never too heavy and never an inconvenience. I told her all I ever asked in return was the same thing back. Not money, not land. Just don't let me drown. Don't hand my little girl a drink you poisoned and drive off like it was nothing. Her jaw tightened, her eyes filled up hard, and she pressed her lips together hard and didn't say anything back. I stepped down. The jury took 4 hours. Ashton sat beside me the whole time and didn't say much, just stayed. When they called us back in, I gripped the edge of the bench and waited. Harley Fletcher Baker, attempted murder, guilty. Child endangerment, guilty. Conspiracy, guilty. Logan Baker, every count, guilty. I didn't stand up. I didn't celebrate. I just let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since July, like it finally had somewhere to go. 3 weeks later, the judge handed down 22 years for Harley, 25 for Logan. Said he'd rarely seen premeditation laid out that thorough against a victim that defenseless. Harley looked back at me once on her way out of the courtroom. I didn't look away, and I didn't say anything either. There was nothing left to say in that room. Outside, the Montana sun was doing what it always does, indifferent, not caring one way or the other what had just happened underneath it. Same sun that nearly finished us on that lake. I called home. Renata put Louise on the phone. Dad, did we win? I stood on those courthouse steps in a funeral suit and told her, yeah, baby, we won. Come home, I'm making you something. Louise is 9 now. She still checks that I'm in the house before she falls asleep every night, calls my name once, and I say I'm here, and she says okay, and goes quiet. That's the whole story. That's what $6 million almost bought. Not much when you say it out loud.